Okay, hi everyone. So this is a continuation of our ethics philosophy class on the philosophy of Karl Marx. Today we're going to talk about how Marx understood ideology, and at the same time, we're going to look at his reading or analysis of reality and by extension history. So we're not only going to look at the term ideology, which has a very specific and powerful meaning in Marx, but also at terms like structure and superstructure. Okay, now, so what was Marx's reading of his current moment, of the way his world and society were organized? At the time when he was reflecting on these things. Okay, so we're talking about 19th century Europe, the age of industrialization. So he says, um, you know, there you can actually uh, bring aspects of reality under two categories. So one is the superstructure. So super meaning one that is over something else, on top of something else, and then the base, the structure, the base, or the foundation. Okay, so what are the things that belong to the superstructure? We're talking about things that are more immaterial, like ideas, discourse, what you are taught in school, um, legislation, for instance, law, what is considered to be art, okay, all of these things. But all of these more abstract things are actually rooted in, and they are usually used to justify the base. The real base is the real foundation, which is in a way more material, because we're talking about a foundation that has an economic material character. What do I mean by that? Let me illustrate that here. So you have, according to Marx, the actual foundation of society, is this. This is the structure, or this is the foundation. We're talking about natural resources, the means of production. So how are you able to produce goods, okay, to create economic value in the world? The means of distribution. So how do you distribute these goods? How do you sell them? How do you reach people who want to buy them, etc.? So part of this also is what Marx calls the forces of production. So, for instance, labor and the relationship between those who are able to command labor to tell people who work what to do, okay, and those who actually work. So, you know, relations of production. So all of these things, they form the basis of society, and everything else. So there's the economic foundation. Everything else is built on that. Okay, so you have law. What is considered to be legal, what is considered to be lawful. Okay, and of course, by extension, what is considered to be illegal, unlawful, politics. So, you know, what is considered to be political discourse, acceptable distribution and use of power, etc. And then everything else, like what you believe in, what you consider to be beautiful or ugly, what you consider to be good, poetry, philosophy, all of these things. So the superstructure, so the superstructure is this, okay? These are built upon the structure, the base. So they are rooted in the base, and you know, their existence, they exist because they, they are founded upon the basis, the foundation, but at the same time, in turn, they justify that foundation. Okay? So here we come upon what, this important term that is ideology. So this is not a neutral term. All of the things that you saw here, those things that are part of the superstructure, they form what is called an ideology. I say it's not a neutral term because I've heard so many students say, they talk about this philosopher's ideology as though ideology, referred merely to a set of ideas, ideas that are neutral. No. So an ideology is whatever is used, in order to justify the present economic structure. Okay, and not only to justify, but at the same time to cover over all the contradictions inherent, all the conflicts inherent in that economic system, all the problems it has, all the injustices that that system brings about. Okay, we're talking about something that's really determinant in the sense that this colors our way of thinking. Like I said, ideology determines, influences, if not determines, what you take to be right, what you take to be lawful, what you take to be good, what you take to be beautiful, what you take to be socially acceptable. So it really goes to the heart of, the question, who are you? What kind of person are you? And a Marxist answer would be, whatever the economic system tells you, you know, the economic system determines, and by extension, the class you belong to determines, your thinking. So, for instance, we've all heard of the American dream. What is the American dream? The American dream is if you come to America, you work hard, you keep your head down, you mind your business, you don't complain too much, you don't ask for a handout from the government, and eventually you would get the life that you deserve, a decent life, a comfortable life, you know and this, if you think about it, this fits exactly the kind of capitalist system that the country has. you know, a capitalist system that requires workers who would be obedient, who would try to earn their wage, day in and day out, weekly, every month. They would, put in the effort so that they get a decent wage, and then eventually they get a house, start a family, and then they would raise their kids, educate them, and the cycle goes on. So the system, would keep on getting the workers that it would need to keep on going. And think about this, think about this in terms of what you think your life plan is. Because the question is, where does that come from? Is that really yours, or is that, you know, a piece or a product of ideology? What are our plans? You want to study well enough at least, eventually get to a decent university, get a more or less high paying job, start a family maybe, contribute to society. And what is this? Is this your dream? Is this your life path? Or is it something that's, you know, um, handed down to you, so to speak, by who? By by society, by everyone else? And maybe this is what the economic system demands from each one of us. Now, like I said, there are conflicts within the capitalist economic system. That's you can find that in the very base, in the foundation. You can see that in the present moment being, the time that Marx was writing. There was a fundamental conflict between, you know two classes. There was a class conflict, there was a class struggle between those who had control over the means of production, those who had property, those who had capital, those who ran the factories, and on the other hand, those who had nothing. They were so poor, you know, that they had to come into work day in and day out, spend 12, 14 hours in the factory, exhausted and just, you know, alive enough to be able to, sleep, rest a little bit, eat, and then eventually get back to the factory the next day. Okay. So there's a conflict between those who have property, those who owned things, and those who worked in order to survive. This was a conflict between the bourgeoisie, the middle class, the growing industrialist class, and the proletariat, those who were too poor. The only thing they had were their offspring, you know. So this is what Marx is telling us, there's a class conflict, and at the same time, the capitalist economic system, it bears within it so many contradictions. And from Marx's point of view at that time, these contradictions would lead to to an eventual fate, to an eventual collapse, a momentous event. What are those contradictions? In a capitalist society, supposedly there was competition, there was variety competition, engagement with other producers, with other capitalists, other countries. But actually, what happens is that all of this leads to monopoly. So fewer and fewer people, holding wealth. There was a need for constant expansion because these capitalists, in order to keep their factories running, they always needed resources, and this would lead to wars among capitalist nations. And wasn't this precisely what happened? What led to the First World War? And then, because of all these contradictions, and then the dissatisfaction, the unhappiness, experienced by the proletariat, this would eventually lead to the internal collapse of capitalism, according to Marx. This was a prediction. He really thought that this would happen. So the proletariat would rise and they would take over the state, the means of production, the force of production, everything. They would seize private property. They would seize the government. The state would have monopoly over finance, commerce, industry, transportation. There would be education for all, but all of this would be oriented towards production. Imagine Soviet Russia. Okay, but mind you, the socialist state was only a phase. It was a transitional phase that would eventually lead towards a communist utopia where there wouldn't be any more classes, class distinctions would go away, and the state itself would become unnecessary. And according to Marx, this would wither away. We would have a situation, a community where everyone would be able to pursue his or her own desires, needs, wants, your true desires, be whoever they wanted while at the same time contributing to society. That's the communist.